Hi, welcome to Al-Muqaddimah. My name is Siavish. On February the 4th, 2025, Agha Khan IV passed away in Lisbon, Portugal. He was the spiritual and secular leader of the Nizari Isma'ili Shias. Upon his death, his around $13 billion worth of estate transferred to his son and successor, the 5th Agha Khan. So naturally, it raised the question of how the leader of a religious group, that's the second largest group of Shias, who themselves make up around 10% of Muslims, established such an enormous wealth. Well, like many of the problems of the modern world, it goes back to the British. This video is made possible by all of my generous patrons who support Al-Muqaddimah financially. If you also want to help in that way, you can become a member right here on YouTube or join my Patreon. The link is in the description. None of my ancestors collaborated with the British, so I need money to fund this. Like I said, Agha Khan IV was the Imam or leader of the Nizari Isma'ili Shia Muslims. Let's break down all four of those terms. So, Muslims are people who believe in the oneness of God or Allah and the Prophet Muhammad being his messenger, his final one. The holy book of Muslims is of course the Quran, which serves as the spiritual guide to all Muslims from its revelation till the end of times. Shias are Muslims who believe that Ali, the Prophet's cousin and son-in-law, should have succeeded him as the secular leader of the Muslim community. They believe that only the descendants of the Prophet, through Ali, had a claim to the secular and eventually even spiritual leadership of the Muslim community. They call this leader Imam, while the Sunnis call the secular leader Caliph or Khalifa. However, as time passed, the descendants of Ali grew, and as they grew, disagreements began to appear over which descendants were the rightful Imams. Eventually, we get to Ja'far as-Sadiq, the 6th Imam of the Shias, a great-great-grandson of Ali ibn Abi Talib. Now, during his lifetime, Ja'far appointed his son Ismail to be his successor and the next Imam. However, Ismail died before his father, and so when Ja'far as-Sadiq passed away, his followers were torn apart on who the next Imam should be. Some argued that since as-Sadiq had appointed Ismail to be his successor, Ismail's line should continue to hold the imamate, beginning with his son Muhammad. Others, however, argued that one of Ja'far's other sons should be the next Imam, namely Musa al-Qadim. This divided the Shias forever into the Twelvers and the Isma'ilis. The Isma'ilis, as the name suggests, were supporters of Ismail's line, while the Twelvers supported Musa al-Qadim. Now, the Ismaili Imam, Muhammad, went into hiding, and a network of underground spies and agents known as the Da'is appeared throughout the Islamic world, who began to gather support for Ismail's descendants, the so-called hidden Imams. Eventually, the Ismailis began military activities around the year 900 CE. By then, the Ismailis had carved out pockets of supporters wherever the Sunnis were weak, in places such as northern Iran, parts of Syria, parts of North Africa, and even India. There were splinter groups as well among them, but the main one rose up from Tunisia under a man named Abdullah al-Mahdi, who claimed to be Ismail's descendant and the Imam of his people. He conquered Tunisia and then moved on Egypt, where his descendants and successors founded the Fatimid Caliphate, which existed from 909 CE to 1171 CE. In 1094, the Fatimid Caliphate itself was hit by a succession crisis upon the death of its most powerful caliph, Al-Mustansir Billah. It seems that he had declared his son Nizar to be his successor, but when Al-Mustansir died, the vizier installed his younger brother, Al-Musta'li, on the throne. Nizar tried to fight for his claim and established a rival caliphate, but he was defeated and executed. Hence, Al-Musta'li was secured on the throne. Nizar's supporters, however, continued to exist and began their own subsect within the Ismailis. Among the supporters of Nizar was a man named Hassan as-Sabah. Hassan as-Sabah founded a group of assassins known as, well, the Assassins. The Assassins were a feared group of mystics and frankly radicals, who were so committed to their cause that they would often carry out suicide missions, killing powerful people in broad daylight. Anyhow, long story short, they terrorized the Middle East, specifically Syria and Iran, until they were destroyed by the Mongols in the 1250s, 60s, and 70s. In 1501 CE, a man named Ismail came to power in Iran, and he unified much of it under his Safavid dynasty. The Safavids were Shias, but not Ismailis. They were Twelvers, who believed that Ismail's brother, Musa al-Qadim, was the rightful heir to their father, Jafar al-Sadiq. Now, despite this, the Safavids had decent relations with the Ismailis as being fellow Shias. Their imams would appear here and there as governors of some area or leaders of some order of mystics or Shias. There were various hidden imams too, but the modern history of the imams of Nizari Ismailis begins with the death of Shah Khalilullah III in 1817. He was the 45th imam and the father of the first Agha Khan. He passed away in the city of Yazd in Iran, where he had moved to be closer to his supporters in India. By this point, the Ismailis in India were quite successful, as the Mughal emperors of India had some Shia leanings and they had allowed Shias to settle there. Shah Khalilullah III was killed in a religious riot that took place between his followers and the followers of a leader of the Twelvers in his city. Anyhow, upon Shah Khalilullah's death, his son, Muhammad Hassan, became the next Imam as Hassan Ali Shah. He was only 13, but he would change everything for the Ismaili Nizaris. The financial situation of the Imam and his family worsened a lot upon the death of his father and some disputes in the family and followers that followed his death. Hassan Ali Shah's mother went to the court of the Iranian emperor, Fath Ali Shah, to ask for justice for the killing of her husband. By then, the Safavids were gone and Iran was now being ruled by the Qajar dynasty. Fath Ali Shah not only punished Shah Khalilullah's killers, but also married his daughter to Hassan Ali Shah and gave him some land and governorship of the city of Qum. He was also given the title of Agha Khan Mahallati, which literally means the leader from Mahallat. Both Agha and Khan mean the same thing. It's something like chief or master or leader or king even. And Mahallat was the name of the town that his family was associated with. Hence, Hassan Ali Shah became Agha Khan I. Agha Khan's father-in-law, Fath Ali Shah, the emperor, died in 1834 and his grandson, Muhammad Shah Qajar, came to power. Muhammad Shah moved Agha Khan to Kirman by making him governor there. Agha Khan proved his skills as an administrator and warrior by bringing peace to Kirman, which had seen rebellions and raidings for a while by this point. Despite this, Agha Khan was recalled by the emperor only 2 years later. This made Agha Khan rebel against the emperor and hold out in the nearby town of Bum. The emperor besieged him in the town for 14 months and eventually took him and his family captives. They stayed in Kirman as prisoners for 8 months. In 1838, the Imam was pardoned and forced to retire to the town of Mahallat. By this point, the Agha Khan had made quite a bit of money as the governor of 2 towns, as well as by collecting religious dues from Ismailis in Iran, Afghanistan, and India. Agha Khan's retirement in Mahallat lasted only 2 years though. In 1840, under the pretense of going for a pilgrimage, Agha Khan started gathering his supporters and unified them into a military, with which he aimed to take Kirman back. He somehow also gained 2 British cannons, which gave him an upper hand in battle. He won various minor and major victories, but was eventually defeated by the governor of Kirman near Balochistan in 1841. He had no choice but to go into exile to India. In the same year, he arrived in Afghanistan, ending some 7 centuries of his ancestors' and predecessors' presence in Iran. In Afghanistan, the Agha Khan found a new set of allies, the British. The British were busy in Afghanistan during the First Afghan War, which went from 1838 to 1842. In 1838, the Qajar, with the Russian support, had tried to take Herat in Afghanistan from its emir, who was supported by the British. Agha Khan's activities after his dismissal as the governor of Kirmani might have pulled some focus from Herat, which helped the British, although it couldn't have been a lot. Still, the Qajars, being more aligned with the Russians, were disliked by the British, and anyone who had beef with them, including the Agha Khan, was a potential ally. Agha Khan might have already made friends with a man named Henry Rawlinson, who was a British agent in Kandahar. He wrote a letter to him before he arrived in Kandahar, and upon his arrival in Kandahar, Rawlinson gave him a daily stipend of 100 rupees. During his stay in Kandahar, he wrote to the British to help them in taking Herat and ruling it for them. However, this plan was discarded when the Afghans, united under Wazir Akbar Khan, pushed the British out in 1842. The Agha Khan even helped the British in their evacuation from Kandahar. Agha Khan then moved to Sindh, where he was, once again, in the service of the British. The author, Farhad Daftary, writes, Agha Khan I rendered further service to the British in Sindh. In particular, he placed his cavalry at their disposal and endeavored to persuade Nasir Khan, the Talpur Amir of Galat, to cede Karachi to the British. Nasir Khan refused to cooperate, and the Agha Khan disclosed the Amir's battle plans to Major James Outram, the British political agent in Sindh. As a result, the British camp was saved from a night attack, and following the Battle of Miani in February 1848, Hyderabad and then all of Sindh were annexed to British India. For his services in Sindh, the Agha Khan received an annual pension of £2,000 from General Sir Charles Napier, the British conqueror of Sindh, who had maintained a friendly relationship with the Nizari Imam from the time of the latter's arrival in Sindh in the autumn of 1842. In Sindh, the Imam stayed in Jirak, now in Pakistan, where his house is still preserved. The Agha Khan then helped the British in conquering Balochistan. He also offered in helping them conquer all of Iran. Afterwards, he moved to Bombay in 1846. For the next 20 years, he appealed to the British to facilitate his return home to Iran, but it couldn't happen. Meanwhile, he began overseeing the Ismaili community in India. A pivotal case in 1866 solidified his position as the leader of the Isma'ilis. So first, let me tell you about the Khaja community of India. They're an ethnic group that lived on the Indian Ocean coast, particularly in Sindh and Gujarat. They were originally Hindu, but they became Muslims in the 14th century. They adopted the Ismaili creed, but the Ismaili creed itself was quite fluid at the time. Various da'is or preachers preached different things, and so the pockets of Ismailis throughout the world were all quite different from each other. The Khajas, for example, were barely Muslims. They believed in the bare minimum of Islam, and most of their traditions came from Hinduism. As Sir Erskine Perry writes, although they call themselves Muslimans, they evidently know but little of their Prophet and of the Quran, nor have they any scholars or men of learning among them, as not a Khaja could be quoted who was acquainted with Arabic or Persian, the two great languages of Muhammadan literature and theology. He wrote this during a case hearing on a Khaja property dispute in 1847. We'll come back to that in a minute. Anyhow, when Agha Khan came to India, a majority of the Khajas aligned with him and considered him their leader. But there were those who didn't want the Agha Khan to take over as leader and rather wanted local leaders to lead the community according to their traditions. The first such incident happened in 1830 when a group of Khajas refused to pay their dues to the Agha Khan. Apparently, Agha Khan was getting regular payments from them while he was in Iran, but we don't know much about that. Agha Khan sent his grandmother and an agent to collect the money, which was around 100,000 rupees, but it was refused and an offer of 20,000 was returned. The people who didn't want to pay Agha Khan were known as the Bar Bhai, meaning the 12, because they were originally 12 people. Agha Khan's agent then filed a suit in the court to collect 12.5% of the profits of all Khajas. It should be noted that the Khaja community was full of business leaders, and so they were quite well off with quite a bit of influence. However, the suit was withdrawn and the Barbhai were kicked out of the local community known as the Jamaat, but they were accepted back in 1835. When Agha Khan moved to Bombay in 1848, the Barbhai and other dissenters broke away from his Jamaat again and founded their own Jamaat Khana, or community center. In 1850, 4 members of this group were killed in the new Jamaat Khana. News articles from the time unanimously blamed the Agha Khan for this. He's blamed for provoking these killings and causing trouble in the Khaja community. In 1851, Judge Erskine Perry, whom I mentioned before, declared that the Jamaat belonged to the Khajas and Agha Khan had no right to interfere in it. Basically, he argued that genealogy took precedence over religion. To claim the leadership of the Khajas, you have to be a Khaja. Along with leadership, obviously there were communal properties and wealth of the Khajas. That was a factor here. Now, there were 2 very important cases involving the Khajas. First, a case filed in 1847, and then one filed in 1866. In 1847, there was a dispute over property after the death of 2 wealthy brothers. According to the Khaja community's own traditions, the daughters of the deceased had no claim to the inheritance, but according to Islamic law, the daughters were owed a portion of the inheritance. In the judgment, Judge Perry upheld the local tradition of the Khaja community while calling them Muslims, but only barely. It's from that judgment that the earlier paragraph I read comes from. He was also the one who ruled that Agha Khan had no claim to the Khaja's Jamaat. However, the 1866 case, famously called the Agha Khan case, was different. By 1866, things had changed quite a bit. In 1857, the Indians had revolted against the British, and the British had to re-evaluate everything, from how they understood Indians to how they ruled them. So the law was also changed. The Khaja leaders claimed in court that the Khajas were Sunnis, and so Agha Khan had no right to claim their leadership. They also complained about communal land that Agha Khan and his supporters had taken over. I should remind you that a majority of the Khajas did support Agha Khan at the time. The case is actually very interesting in itself, where there were arguments about Agha Khan's genealogy, his divinity, and his claim to be the Imam. At one point, the Khaja leaders' lawyer brought up the fact that Agha Khan was a descendant of the leaders of the assassins, hence connecting him and his ancestors to the killings that took place in 1850. Anyhow, the judge decided that the Khajas were indeed Isma'ilis and had been converted by an agent of Agha Khan's ancestors, and hence Agha Khan was their leader, and everything they had that was communal was Agha Khan's. The case is very interesting. There's a source in the description that goes more into detail on that if you want to read it. Anyhow, this case made Agha Khan the leader of the Khajas, the owner of their communal property, and solidified him as a religious leader. There were no more threats to his power. He was basically the king of the Isma'ilis. He owned all their communal property and collected money from them as religious dues. He and the following Agha Khans would bring reform to the Khaja community by uniting them under a single constitution that guided them according to more mainstream Shia traditions rather than their existing Hindu-leaning traditions. Some of these reforms were actually quite progressive. Agha Khan remained close with the British, who addressed him as His Highness. When future King Edward VII came to India for his royal visit, he visited his home. His home in Bombay was known as the Agha Hall, and believe it or not, it's now been redeveloped into luxury apartments. You cannot blend religion and capitalism like the Agha Khans do. Absolute pioneers of the field. By the time of Agha Khan's death in 1881, he was already quite rich. He had multiple homes, he bred and raised horses, and did all the other things that rich people do. He was also very well established in British circles and had influence all over his community. He was being treated by the British like Indian princes who had supported the British. Agha Khan II and III would continue cozying up to the British and would eventually hold prestigious positions in British India. They also continued representing Muslims in the British government and doing charitable works like running schools and stuff. Agha Khan III was even the president of the All India Muslim League for 5 years. He also helped the famous Aligarh University. However, around the First World War, Agha Khan III withdrew from India and permanently moved to Europe. but he stayed in touch with India and exerted his influence in various matters concerning Indian Muslims. Along with moving the Agha Khans to Europe, he was also the first in the family to marry a white woman. He dined with Queen Victoria, met Kaiser Wilhelm II of Germany, he met the Ottoman Sultan, he attended the coronation of Victoria's son, Edward VII, and Edward VII also gave him the title of Grand Knight Commander of the Indian Empire, which was the highest honor a British Indian could get. During the First World War, he urged his followers to support the Allies against Germany and the Ottoman Empire, who were fellow Muslims. For this, in 1916, Agha Khan III was recognized as a prince by the British government. Later, he would attempt to actually gain a territory from the British in India, where he could rule as prince, but his petition was rejected. After Agha Khan III died, he declared his grandson Karim to be his successor instead of one of his sons because he wanted a younger generation to head the Ismailis. Karim was around 20 years old at the time, and he served as Agha Khan IV for around 68 years and passed away recently. Okay, now to my favorite segment of my videos, Marxist rant. If you think that people having billions of dollars is completely fine and there's nothing wrong with it, please don't watch any further. If you're still here, that is you legally declaring yourself to be a socialist or a full-on communist. And when the fascists rise up, you're going to be considered one of us, so proceed with caution. See you next time.